This is the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 17 through 22. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. You and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 12 through 15. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life."
It was just a lawnmower. And I'm not sure if you all are aware, but in no culture, in no ethnic tradition, in any society, does a lawnmower hold any symbolic significance. It doesn't hold any meaning. There is no story of the great lawnmower that's changed anyone's mind about anything. Yet it was the lawnmower that proved my dad did not care or listen a single bit when I was 15 years old. It is the lawnmower that proved my family's disrespect for everything I tried to do for them. Yes, the lawnmower. If you ask my parents, this was a ridiculous conversation and even a more convoluted memory. Yet, it held great meaning for me for many years. I was the one who mowed the grass, and I had been doing it for quite a while, thank you. I was the one who pushed the darn thing around the yard, maybe not as often as my dad would have liked, and certainly not as soon as he told me to. But I was the one who did the work. You would think when the old mower died that I would have a voice, an important voice, in choosing the next one, right? Nope. The new mower my dad liked showed up. It had all the features I hated. That darn hard, solid plastic bagger stuck on the back. It can't turn well. It is an injustice that exemplifies the disrespect teenagers around the world have been getting from generation to generation, and it stands today, right?
All right.
Yes, thank you. All right, that might be a stretch. But at the time, it's really how I felt. But I don't know when the mower became the great symbol of disrespect in my teenage life. I don't know when the mower became the embodiment of all the hurt between me and my dad. Was it really that egregious of a moment? Was it just the last straw in a relationship that was already difficult? Was I that whiny of a kid? When did the mower take on meaning? When does any event or anything gain significance past the moment? Events often get their meaning after the fact. It's because what happens after that. It's what results from the thing or the moment. Other events get their meaning because of how we tell the story or who gets to tell the story, right? Sometimes things get their meaning very intentionally. Other times the meaning comes because we need something. We need to hold on to something or some ideal. to hold on to how we felt in a moment. So a day, an event, a thing, a tree, a ring, a mower are given meaning as we try to hold on to something bigger that we just can't hold on to. Some things happen intentionally. Some just happen. For example, Christmas. We don't know exactly when Jesus was born, but along the way, Christians wanted to celebrate it. And there was this really great Roman feast day celebrating the winter solstice. And they didn't have a reason to celebrate it anymore because they weren't pagan anymore. They'd all become Christian. So it was a perfect match. They decided that's the day they would celebrate Jesus' birthday. And today it's just Christmas, right? That it was intentionally chosen. Easter, on the other hand, well, it happened. And there was enough cultural story around it, enough in the Jewish tradition of calendars and when Passover is and when that lands. There was enough story on that, enough evidence to trace back that day happened. We didn't choose when Easter was. We didn't say it should be close enough to Christmas that we almost don't get done with one before the other comes back around and Walmart can't change the shelves that fast. If we chose it, we'd have put it in June or July, right? Although lilies could have bloomed on their own without having to be stuck in a greenhouse. We could have organized this better. But no, some events just happen. They have significance because it happened and we now live out of it. Some moments have meaning, not just holidays, that come up in our own lives. They're things that are personal to us. Weddings and anniversaries, these tend to be pretty well planned, right? You can guess when your anniversary is going to be. Funerals, birthdays, these tend to be events that interrupted our lives, interrupted the schedule. They happened when they happened. Sometimes you get to choose the birthday of a child, that's lucky. Most often, they tell you when they're coming. The day of the accident, the day of the diagnosis, the day of the betrayal, the day of them leaving. These come without warning. They come without purpose. They come without a sense of meaning in the moment. Yet over time we discover one, or we assign one. As we tell the story, as we process the event, as we wrestle with our new reality that this thing has left us in, as we make amends, as we process grief, as we find new directions, events can take on meaning that we did not expect and often did not intend. Events can take on a meaning because something has changed. We have changed. Sometimes this is helpful. We can find a new purpose or a new direction. Sometimes it's hurtful. We can obsess over loss or revenge. Just look at the many ways that our nation is wrestling with how we celebrate 9/11 even today. The times when we obsess on revenge and the times when we look for new possibilities. We can see both in that fledgling holiday, new compared to others. Think about how we celebrate Juneteenth. Are we lamenting all the pain and the struggle, the delay of justice served, the pain of slavery? Or are we celebrating the freedom and the news that came? The black community in Texas will tell you Juneteenth celebrated differently there than how many of our celebrations nationally took place this year. We're wrestling with what that day means to us as we try to figure it out. Either way, events can take on meaning because something has changed. We have changed. In our scripture today, we get a flood story. Noah, his family, the animals. It's a complicated story. And if you want to read what comes after the flood, it gets even more complicated. But just the portions we have today, Noah is described as being a great person in the face of so many bad people. Noah is given directions for building a great boat, an ark. Noah is charged by God to save the future existence of all animals and humanity. Sounds like a great modern movie, doesn't it? But as we read the text, some questions come up. Some of these are just practical questions, right? In one passage, it sounds like it's 40 days. In another, it sounds like it's 100 and some days. In one chapter, it says 2 of each animal. One chapter later, it says 2 of the unclean and 7 of the clean. It asks practical questions like, how did Noah know the clean from the unclean when Moses is still a long, long way from ever receiving the law of God that has the clean and unclean stuff in it? There's some practical questions to ask in the scripture, right? There's also some philosophical ones. Some philosophical questions. Why does God not just poof, make all the bad people go away? Why does God not just poof, make all the bad people be good? Why does God need to flood everything? Surely the little lizards didn't do anything wrong, right? And if God made all the people, isn't all this God's fault to start with? Some questions get more personal as we try to figure out our own relationship with God, our own understanding of ourselves and our relationship with God. Is God really that cruel? Can a rainbow really make up for that much destruction? This is where we have to be really careful. Very careful how we read Scripture. The writers saw the world differently than we do. The writers had a different understanding of God and the creation they lived in than we do. The way this story is told is intended to be a comfort. It is a story of death and destruction that is intended to be comforting. It's hard to wrap our brain around, right? It's a story intended to bring an assurance for the future. But for us, outside of a really cute but ironic theme for a baby's room, this scripture often brings more confusion and doubt than anything else. Those who told the story, those who first told the story for many generations, probably the grandmothers passing it down around cook fires, those who told the story, they believed that all things came from God. At this point in Jewish theology, philosophy, understanding, everything good or bad that happened came from God. There was not a separate evil in the world. There wasn't an understanding of an amassed exponential brokenness of people that kept messing it up that we were trying to fix. Those are theological constructs that really come much later in our story. At this point, everything good or bad came from God. So something bad happened to you, it was either your fault or your family's fault. Have you heard the expression, the sins of the father are visited upon the children? That's where this comes from. The idea that if you didn't do it, then your parents did something wrong and you're paying for it. Or your children did something wrong and you're paying for it. That's why in Scripture a lot of times people give sacrifices on behalf of the generations before and after them. Just in case they messed up, there wouldn't be calamity on the family, because they believed it all came from God. So if there was a huge flood, if there was a catastrophic natural event that wiped out a large portion of the population around them, that left individual pockets of people feeling isolated, as if they were the only people left on earth, how else would they explain it? But God was with them in the end. It's curious, a note on storytelling and cultures. Last week we talked about the creation story and how every culture seems to have a creation story. You would think that the other stories we would share in common might be about the procurement of fire, or where babies come from. But the most common story across cultures after creation is that of the flood. A great flood. It seems that historically there must have been some large water event that changed everything, at least for those involved. It seems that there was a great flood of some kind. Now, cultural anthropologists have been saying this for a long time. There's enough evidence in enough cultures to suggest there was a flood event. Maybe not 40 days worth, and maybe not the whole face of the earth, but a large enough event that it felt like it for those experiencing it. And actually, climatologists have been telling us the same thing. As they study glaciers, they see evidence of retreating and expanding over time. That our whole ecosystem has its own process of breath in and out. The whole earth is constantly moving, cycles, evidence of transitions in our environment. Maybe cultural anthropologists, maybe climatologists are just catching up with Grandma and what she already knew. There was a lot of water one day, and it changed everything. And it left us wondering why. It left people trying to understand why. We receive this story from before recorded history. This story is older than written history. If you ever see a date attached to the flood story, ignore it. It's older than that. Anybody who tries to put a number date on when this happened is grasping at the Bible as a history book and a science book. Let it go. This story has nothing to do with water. That's not what Grandma's telling us about. The reason the story gets told again isn't because there was a great flood. The generations that followed didn't remember it. They didn't need to give meaning to the moment anymore. They didn't need to make sense of the disaster that happened. So why did it keep getting told? Because Grandma had something else for us to learn in the story. It is a story that tells us that God was present in the midst of a natural disaster, and at the end of it, God was present with them again. And at the end, God promised to always be with them and put a rainbow in the sky that says, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're dealing with, you are not alone. God cares. God is with you, and God cares. And that, church, is why we plaster it all over the nursery walls. That and animals are really cute. But that's the story of the flood. It's not about the cataclysmic change. It's not about the death and destruction. That's people in the time trying to come to terms with what happened, to assign meaning to events that were bigger than them, that were beyond their fears. But it was an assurance in the end that God had made it through. Their faith had held onto them and them onto God. God cares. That's the meaning behind the story. When the flood comes, when the hurricane or the tornado strike, when the diagnosis is received, when my lover leaves, when someone close dies, when I hit rock bottom again, God cares. When poverty is made a weapon, when control is disguised as freedom, when racism is dismissed with thoughts and prayers, God still cares. When the moment seems empty, when the event seems meaningless, God cares. The story does not give us a scientific explanation of rainbows. It does not condemn people as unredeemable. The story in Genesis reminds us that God cares. This story invites us to see God in our struggles, in our floods, so that those moments might echo the promise of Scripture. God is always with us, and God cares, whether we try to understand things in our own ways or not. Whether we're trying to understand why our parents don't do what we ask, or listen when it's time to buy a lawnmower. Or whether we're asking why the rainbow appeared on our drive home amidst our tears. Or we're asking why such bad things happen to such good people. Or why that friend left a voicemail at just when we needed it. Or so many other moments that we seek to find understanding for in our lives. We don't have answers to them. But we do know, thanks to Grandma and the story she told, thanks to the faith they knew through the flood, the faith they've known from generation to generation, handed down to us. The story of the flood reminds us to lift our eyes, to search for rainbows, to lift our hearts and search for love, and to believe that God is always with us, and God cares.